I'm going to tell you about something that happened in my house, and I need you to understand that I'm not the sort of person who believes in this kind of thing, or I wasn't anyway. I'm 42, I work in insurance assessment, I've got a mortgage and a car that needs its MOT, and a routine that's kept me steady for years. I mention all this because I want you to know I'm ordinary, boring even, the kind of person who checks the locks twice before bed and keeps spreadsheets for household expenses. None of that matters now, but it mattered to me when this started. It was late September when I first noticed the smell. Not unpleasant exactly, just odd. Like damp fabric that's been left in the washing machine too long, faintly sour and organic. My house is a detached 3-bedroom place in Warwickshire, built sometime in the 1930s, and I'd been living there for about 7 years without any issues. The smell appeared in the spare bedroom, the one I use as an office, and at first I assumed it was something simple. A dead mouse in the walls maybe, or a problem with the radiator. I checked everything I could think of, pulled the furniture away from the walls, inspected the carpet, looked behind the radiator for any signs of leaks or mold. Nothing. The smell would be there in the mornings when I went in to start work, strongest near the window, and by afternoon it would fade to almost nothing. I got used to it after a few days, the way you get used to anything if it's consistent enough, and I stopped noticing it unless I'd been out of the room for a while. Work was busy that autumn. There'd been a series of storms that caused flooding across the Midlands, and I was processing claims constantly, spending 10 or 12 hours a day at my desk going through photographs of ruined carpets and water-damaged walls. I'd break for lunch, make myself a sandwich, then go straight back to it. The smell in the office became part of the background, like the hum of my computer or the sound of rain against the window. The first thing that actually bothered me happened on a Tuesday morning in early October. I'd got up around 7, made coffee, gone through to the office to start work. My desk faces the window, looking out over the back garden, and I keep my workspace fairly minimal. Computer, desk lamp, a few files in a wire tray, a mug for pens. Everything has its place because I find clutter distracting. When I sat down that morning, the pens were scattered across the desk. All of them, maybe a dozen in total, arranged in what looked like a deliberate pattern. Not random, not like they'd been knocked over. They were laid out in parallel lines, perfectly spaced, all pointing toward the door. I stared at them for a moment, confused, trying to remember if I'd done something the night before and forgotten. But I hadn't been at my desk the previous evening. I'd watched television downstairs, gone to bed around 11, and locked up like I always do. I gathered the pens up and put them back in the mug, shaking my head at myself. I must have knocked them over and not noticed, or perhaps I'd been more tired than I thought and had moved them without registering it. I've lived alone since my divorce 6 years ago, and I've developed odd little habits, things I do automatically without thinking. It seemed more plausible than any alternative. Work took over my attention, and I forgot about it. I had a complicated claim to assess, a warehouse with storm damage, and questions about whether the client's insurance actually covered the specific type of water ingress they'd experienced. It required careful reading of policy documents and several phone calls to clarify details. By the time I finished for the day, my eyes were aching and my shoulders were tight with tension. That evening, I made dinner, some pasta with sauce from a jar, and ate it in front of the television. There was a documentary about urban planning that I watched without really absorbing any information. My mind kept drifting, thinking about work, about bills that needed paying, about the fact that I needed to book the car in for its service. Normal things, boring things. I went to bed around 10:30 and fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up just after 3 in the morning. No idea why. One moment I was asleep, the next I was lying there in the dark, completely alert, my heart beating slightly faster than normal. The house was silent except for the usual settling noises, the faint creak of floorboards contracting in the cold. I lay there for a while, waiting for whatever had woken me to make sense, but nothing happened. Eventually, I got up to use the bathroom. The landing was dark. I hadn't bothered turning on the light, just felt my way along the wall the way I'd done hundreds of times before. The bathroom door was at the end of the landing, past the spare bedroom and the second bedroom that I mostly use for storage. As I walked past the office, I smelled it again. That sour, damp smell, much stronger than usual. Strong enough that I stopped and stood there in the darkness, breathing it in, trying to identify what it reminded me of. Then I heard something from inside the room, a soft sound, like fabric moving, like someone shifting their weight from one foot to another. I stood absolutely still, my hand against the wall, listening. The sound didn't repeat. After perhaps 30 seconds of silence, I reached around the door frame and flicked on the light. The room was empty. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Desk, chair, computer, filing cabinet. The window was closed. The curtains were drawn. There was nobody there and nowhere anyone could hide. I checked anyway, looked behind the door and inside the small cupboard where I keep office supplies. Nothing. I used the bathroom, went back to bed, and lay awake until dawn trying to convince myself I'd imagined the sound. By morning, I'd almost succeeded. Almost. The following week passed without incident. I worked, ate, slept, and tried to ignore the faint sense of unease that had settled over me like fine dust. The smell in the office persisted, but I'd stopped noticing it unless I deliberately paid attention. Everything was normal, or normal enough that I could pretend it was. Then on Friday evening, I came home from doing the weekly shop and found every drawer in my bedroom pulled open. Not violently, not ransacked, just opened about halfway. The chest of drawers, the bedside tables, even the wardrobe doors were standing ajar. I stood in the doorway with bags of shopping in my hands, staring at them, my mind working through possibilities. Break-in was the obvious answer, but nothing was missing. My laptop was still in the office. My television was still downstairs. My watch was sitting on the bedside table exactly where I'd left it that morning. The front and back doors were locked. Every window was closed and latched. I checked them all twice, then a third time, growing increasingly agitated. I put the shopping away, closed all the drawers and doors, and tried to think rationally. Perhaps I'd opened them myself that morning while getting dressed and had been too distracted to register it. Perhaps I'd been looking for something and had forgotten. I've always considered myself fairly sharp, but I'm aware that memory is unreliable, that we all have gaps we fill in without realizing. That explanation satisfied me for approximately 2 hours. Then I went upstairs to get ready for bed and found them all open again. Every single one. I'd closed them all after discovering them the first time. I was absolutely certain of that. I'd gone around the room methodically, shutting each drawer and door, testing them to make sure they were properly closed. And now they were open again. I closed them once more, slower this time, really paying attention to what I was doing. Then I went back downstairs and made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the mug, trying to think. The house was quiet. Outside, I could hear a car drive past, somebody's dog barking in the distance. Normal sounds from a normal Friday evening in a normal town. I considered calling someone. My brother lives in Birmingham, only about an hour away, and we speak fairly regularly. But what would I tell him? That my drawers kept opening by themselves. He'd think I was having some kind of episode, and perhaps I was. Stress can do strange things. I'd been working long hours, not sleeping brilliantly, eating poorly. Maybe I was experiencing some kind of breakdown, and these were the symptoms. I went to bed without checking the drawers again. I didn't want to know if they were open. I lay there with the lamp on, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. Every small sound felt amplified. The central heating ticking as it cooled down. The wind in the trees outside. The distant sound of a car alarm somewhere in the neighborhood. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start around 4:30, my mouth dry and my neck aching from the angle I'd been lying at. The lamp was off. I always sleep with it on now, or I had been since all this started, but it was definitely off. I reached for the switch and turned it on, and immediately wished I hadn't. The drawers were open again, but this time things had been removed from them and placed on the bed around me. Clothes mostly, folded neatly and arranged in small piles. Socks, shirts, underwear. They were laid out on top of the duvet in a pattern I couldn't interpret, surrounding me like I was the center of some kind of display. I got out of bed very carefully, as if sudden movement might trigger something. My legs felt weak, and I realized my hands were shaking. I gathered up all the clothes, stuffed them back into the drawers without any attempt at organization, and shoved the drawers closed. Then I left the room, went downstairs, and sat on the sofa with all the lights on until it was properly morning. I didn't go back upstairs until nearly 9. When I did, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The drawers were closed, nothing had been moved. In the bright morning light, the whole thing felt absurd, like a bad dream that loses its power once you're awake. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it standing at the kitchen counter while looking out at the garden. The grass needed cutting. The fence at the bottom needed treating before winter properly set in. Normal maintenance for a normal house. I decided to spend the day out. I drove into Stratford, walked around for a few hours, had lunch in a pub I'd been to before. There were tourists everywhere, taking photographs of the Tudor buildings and browsing the shops. I envied them their easy enjoyment, their simple purpose. I bought a book I didn't need and a newspaper I didn't read, then drove home as it was getting dark. The house felt different when I let myself in. Not obviously wrong, just slightly off in a way I couldn't identify. The temperature, maybe, or the quality of the light. I went through each room, turning on lamps, checking windows, looking for anything out of place. Everything seemed fine. I made dinner, watched some television, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. I woke up cold, genuinely, deeply cold, like I'd been sleeping outside. My breath was visible in the air above me, small clouds of condensation that formed and dissipated with each exhale. I reached for my phone to check the time and saw it was just after 2 in the morning. The heating should have been on. I keep the thermostat set fairly high because I hate being cold, and the house is generally warm enough that I only use a light duvet even in winter. I got up and put on a jumper and thick socks, then went to check the thermostat in the hallway. It showed the temperature as 14 degrees, well below what it should have been. I adjusted it, turned it up higher, and waited to hear the boiler kick in. Nothing happened. I went down to the kitchen, where the boiler is mounted on the wall, and checked the display. Everything looked normal. The pilot light was on. The pressure was fine. But when I held my hand against the radiator in the kitchen, it was stone cold. I spent 20 minutes trying to fix it, pressing buttons and adjusting settings before accepting I'd need to call someone in the morning. I went back upstairs, piled an extra blanket on the bed, and tried to get warm. It took a long time. Even under the covers, I could feel the cold seeping in, settling into my bones. I lay there shivering, drifting in and out of sleep, and at some point I became aware of a presence in the room. I can't explain how I knew. I didn't hear anything or see anything. I just suddenly knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't alone, that something was standing near the foot of the bed, watching me. I kept my eyes closed, too frightened to open them, my breathing shallow and quick. I waited for something to happen, for whatever was there to move or speak or touch me, but it just stood there. I could feel its attention like weight pressing down on me. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, or perhaps I passed out from fear and exhaustion. When I woke again, it was morning and the bedroom was warm. Sunlight was coming through the gap in the curtains. The heating had apparently fixed itself, the radiator hot to the touch. I got up, exhausted and anxious, and went through to the bathroom. That's when I saw the marks on the mirror. Handprints, dozens of them, covering the entire surface. Small handprints, like a child's, pressed against the glass from the inside. They overlapped and clustered, most concentrated in the center, fading out toward the edges. I stood there staring at them, my toothbrush in my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. I reached out slowly and touched one of the prints. The glass was cold under my fingers, much colder than it should have been. The print was on the inside of the mirror, behind the glass, somewhere it couldn't possibly be. I traced the outline of the small hand, feeling the temperature difference, and my own hand was trembling so badly I had to lower it. I left the bathroom, went downstairs, and called my brother. I told him I needed him to come over, that something was wrong with the house. He must have heard something in my voice because he didn't ask questions, just said he'd be there in an hour. I waited in the kitchen, door open so I could see the hallway, drinking tea I couldn't taste. When he arrived, I showed him the mirror. The handprints were gone. The glass was clear and clean, slightly fogged with condensation from the bathroom, but otherwise completely normal. He looked at me with concern and asked if I was feeling all right, if I'd been sleeping enough. I told him I was fine, just tired, probably imagining things. He stayed for a cup of tea and chatted about his children and his job. Normal conversation that felt like it was happening to someone else. After he left, I went back upstairs and checked the mirror again. Still clear, no trace of the handprints. I wondered if I was losing my mind, if everything that had been happening was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But I knew what I'd seen. Those prints had been real. The activity escalated after that, though gradually enough that I kept thinking, maybe this would be the last incident, maybe it was over now. Objects moved, always when I wasn't looking. Always things that were plausibly explained by forgetfulness or carelessness. My keys would be in the fridge. My shoes would be at the top of the stairs. Books would be reshuffled on the shelves. The office became difficult to work in. I'd sit down at my desk and immediately feel uncomfortable, like I was intruding on someone else's space. The smell was constant now, permeating everything. I started working downstairs at the kitchen table instead, but that didn't help much. I could still feel it, that sense of being watched, of sharing my space with something that didn't want me there. I stopped sleeping properly. I'd lie awake, listening to sounds I couldn't identify, footsteps that might have been the house settling, breathing that might have been the wind. Every night the cold would come back, seeping through the walls and floor regardless of what the thermostat said, I'd pile on blankets and jumpers and still wake up shivering, my jaw aching from clenching my teeth. Then one evening, in late November, I came home from a doctor's appointment, a routine checkup I'd been putting off for months. The doctor had asked if I was sleeping all right, if I was under any unusual stress. I'd lied and said everything was fine. I let myself in the front door and immediately knew something had changed. The house felt different, heavier somehow. The air was thick with that smell, stronger than ever. And underneath it was something else, something rotten. I went through to the kitchen and found the source. The back door was standing open, letting in the cold November air. And on the kitchen table was a dead bird. A crow, I think, though I'm not sure. It had been arranged carefully, wings spread out, head turned to face the doorway. Its eyes were gone. I backed out of the kitchen, my heart pounding, and checked the back door. No signs of forced entry. The lock was intact. The door had been opened from the inside. I looked at the bird again, at the deliberate positioning of it, and something in me just broke. I left the house, got in my car, and drove to a hotel on the outskirts of Warwick. I checked in for one night, went up to the room, and sat on the bed staring at nothing until it got dark. I didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally did, letting myself in during the middle of a bright afternoon, the bird was gone. The kitchen table was clean. The back door was closed and locked. Everything looked completely normal, as if nothing had ever happened. But I know what I saw, and I know that whatever is in my house is not leaving. I've learned to live around it, to navigate my own home like I'm a guest. I keep to certain rooms. I avoid others. I don't ask questions and I don't challenge it. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear it moving around upstairs, the soft sound of doors opening and closing, footsteps in the empty rooms, and every morning when I wake up, there are small handprints on the windows, fading in the morning light like they were never there at all. I should move, I know that, but I'm not sure it would make any difference. I think it's chosen me rather than the house. And whatever it wants, whatever it's trying to tell me, I don't think I want to know. I've been thinking about whether to write this down for weeks now, and I'm still not convinced it's a good idea. There's something about committing these events to paper that makes them permanent in a way they haven't been until now. As long as they stay in my head, I can edit them, rationalize them, reshape them into something more palatable. But once I write them down, they become fixed, and I'll have to accept that everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 37 years old. I work as a legal secretary in Leeds, though I live about 20 miles outside the city in a small market town that most people have never heard of. I've been divorced for 4 years, no children, and I rent a Victorian terrace on a quiet street lined with lime trees. It's the kind of place estate agents describe as full of character, which generally means it's old and slightly inconvenient, but charming enough that you overlook the drafts and the odd quirks. I moved into the house in January of last year. It's a mid-terrace with 2 bedrooms, a narrow staircase, and original features that include sash windows that rattle in the wind and floorboards that creak no matter how carefully you walk. The previous tenants had been an elderly couple who'd lived there for decades, and when they moved into sheltered accommodation, the landlord gave the place a quick refresh. New carpets upstairs, a coat of magnolia paint throughout, and that was about it. The rent was reasonable and the location suited me, so I signed a 12-month lease without much deliberation. The first few months were perfectly ordinary. I settled into a routine, learned which floorboards were the creakiest, figured out that the kitchen tap needed to be turned off with just the right amount of force, or it would drip all night. I bought furniture from charity shops and online marketplaces, gradually making the place feel like mine. My solicitor's office is small, and the work is steady if not particularly exciting, mostly conveyancing and wills, and I'd come home each evening, make dinner, and spend a few hours reading or watching something on my laptop before bed. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how unremarkable everything was. I wasn't going through any crisis or upheaval. I wasn't stressed or sleep-deprived or drinking too much. I was living a quiet, organized life in a house that suited me perfectly well. That's important to remember. The first incident happened in late March. I'd been living there for about 10 weeks and had started to feel genuinely settled. I'd painted the smaller bedroom a soft blue-gray and set it up as a study, with a desk under the window and shelves along one wall for my books. I spent most evenings in there catching up on work or reading, and I'd developed a habit of leaving a mug of tea on the windowsill while I worked. One Thursday evening, I made myself a cup of tea, carried it upstairs, and placed it on the windowsill like always. I was reviewing a contract, one of those tedious documents full of legal jargon that requires real concentration to pass properly. After perhaps 20 minutes, I reached for my tea without looking, my hand moving automatically to where I knew the mug would be. It wasn't there. I glanced up, confused, and saw the mug sitting on the opposite windowsill. The room has 2 sash windows side by side, about a meter apart, and the mug had somehow moved from the right window to the left. I stared at it for a moment, trying to work out what had happened. I was certain I'd placed it on the right windowsill, absolutely certain. But there it was, on the left, steam still rising from it, completely undisturbed. I got up and examined both windowsills. There was a faint ring of moisture on the left sill where the mug was sitting, but nothing on the right. I picked up the mug and took a sip, the tea still hot, and looked around the room as if I might find some explanation written on the walls. The windows were both closed. The door was closed. I was alone in the house. I decided I must have placed the mug on the left windowsill without thinking, perhaps distracted by something in the contract I was reading. Memory is unreliable, especially when you're doing something routine and automatic. I felt foolish for having been so certain about something I'd clearly misremembered, and I went back to work trying to shake off the unsettled feeling that had crept over me. Over the next week, I found myself paying more attention to small details, checking and double-checking where I'd put things. My keys, my phone, my glasses. Everything stayed exactly where I left it. I started to relax again, convinced the incident with the tea had been nothing more than a lapse in attention. Then one morning in early April, I came downstairs to find all the photographs I'd hung in the hallway turned upside down. There were 5 of them, all in simple black frames, arranged in a row along the wall going up the stairs. They were photos I'd taken myself over the years, landscapes mostly, places I'd visited before my marriage fell apart. I'd spent a good hour getting them level and evenly spaced when I'd first moved in, using a spirit level and measuring carefully. Now they were all inverted, still perfectly level, still evenly spaced, but upside down. I stood at the bottom of the stairs looking up at them, my handbag still over my shoulder, trying to process what I was seeing. I'd come down these stairs that morning, walked past these photographs on my way to work, and they'd been the right way up. I was certain of it. I specifically remembered glancing at one of them, a photograph of the North York moors taken on a grey afternoon, and thinking I should really go back there sometime. I climbed the stairs slowly, examining each photograph. The frames were secure on their hooks. The glass was clean. There was no sign anyone had touched them. I lifted one down, turned it right way up, and hung it back on its hook. Then I did the same with the other 4, my hand steady, but my mind racing through possibilities. Break-in seemed unlikely. Nothing was missing. The doors and windows were all locked, and surely a burglar wouldn't waste time carefully inverting photographs. I lived alone, so there was no possibility of someone playing a prank. That left 2 options. Either I'd somehow turned all the photographs upside down myself in some bizarre episode I had no memory of, or something else was going on. I was late for work that morning. I sat in my car outside the house for 10 minutes, staring at the front door, trying to decide whether I should go back inside and check everything again, or just drive away and deal with it later. In the end, I drove to the office, parked, and went through my day in a sort of fog, barely able to concentrate on the work in front of me. That evening, I went through the house methodically, room by room, looking for anything else that might have been moved or changed. Everything seemed normal. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it that morning. The living room was undisturbed. Upstairs, both bedrooms looked fine. The bathroom was clean and ordinary. I checked the loft hatch, though I'd never been up there myself, and it was firmly closed with no evidence anyone had accessed it recently. I made dinner, pasta with pesto from a jar, and ate it sitting on the sofa watching a quiz show on television. The house was warm. The street outside was quiet. Everything felt perfectly normal, and by the time I went to bed, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd either done something strange in my sleep or there was some other rational explanation I hadn't thought of yet. I woke around 3:30 in the morning, needing the bathroom. The landing was dark and I didn't bother with the light, just felt my way along the wall as I'd done countless times before. As I passed the study, I heard something from inside, a soft rustling sound like pages being turned. I stopped, my hand against the wallpaper, listening. The sound continued, slow, deliberate, the whisper of paper on paper. I'd left a stack of documents on the desk, contracts I needed to review over the weekend, and it sounded exactly like someone was sitting there leafing through them. My heart started beating faster, but I made myself move toward the door, reaching for the light switch. The overhead light came on, harsh and sudden, and the room was empty. The documents on the desk were undisturbed. The chair was tucked in. The windows were closed and the curtains were drawn. I stood in the doorway, breathing a bit faster than normal, and surveyed the space carefully. Nothing was out of place. Nothing had moved. I used the bathroom, went back to bed, and lay awake until dawn, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak of the floorboards felt loaded with meaning. Every gust of wind against the windows made me tense. When my alarm went off at 7, I was exhausted, my eyes gritty and my head aching. Work that day was difficult. I kept losing track of what I was doing, reading the same paragraph multiple times without absorbing any information. My colleague Jennifer asked if I was feeling all right, and I told her I hadn't slept well, which was true enough. She suggested I take an early mark and get some rest, but I stayed until 5 out of sheer stubbornness, determined not to let whatever was happening affect my professional life. When I got home, the house felt different. I can't articulate exactly how, but there was a quality to the silence that hadn't been there before, a weight to it. I put my bag down in the hallway and stood very still, listening. Nothing, just the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the distant sound of traffic from the main road. I went through to make tea and found the kitchen chairs arranged in a circle in the middle of the room. I have 4 chairs that normally sit around the small table against the wall, and someone had moved them into the center of the floor, facing inward, as if set up for a meeting or seance. I stood in the doorway looking at them, my coat still on, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This couldn't be explained away. This wasn't a lapse in memory or a trick of perception. Someone or something had deliberately moved these chairs while I was at work. I checked the back door, the windows, but everything was locked. I went through the entire house again, checking every room, every cupboard, looking for any sign of intrusion. There was nothing. I moved the chairs back to the table, trying to stay calm, trying to think logically. Perhaps the landlord had a spare key and had let himself in for some reason. But why would he arrange the chairs like that? Perhaps there was someone else with access to the property I didn't know about. But that seemed unlikely, and besides, what would be the point? I called the landlord that evening. He's a bloke named David, who owns several properties in the area, and I'd only met him twice, once at the viewing, and once when I signed the paperwork. He sounded distracted when he answered, like I'd interrupted something, and I asked him if he'd been to the house that day. He said no, he hadn't, and asked if there was a problem. I told him I thought someone might have a key, that things had been moved around. He assured me that only he and I had keys, and suggested perhaps I'd simply forgotten rearranging things. I didn't argue. I thanked him and ended the call. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed with the lamp on, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound the house made. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Clear, distinct footsteps, the creak of someone's weight on the old boards. They climbed slowly from the ground floor to the landing, then stopped. I lay there rigid with fear, hardly breathing, waiting for whatever came next. Nothing came next. The footsteps didn't resume. No door opened. No floorboards creaked. Just silence, absolute and oppressive. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, I made myself get up and check the landing. It was empty. Both bedroom doors were closed, exactly as I'd left them. The bathroom door was open. Everything was normal. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I watched the window gradually lighten as dawn approached, and when my alarm went off, I felt like I'd been awake for days. I called in sick to work, something I almost never do, and spent the morning sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee and trying to decide what to do. Moving seemed like the obvious solution. Pack my things, break the lease, find somewhere else to live. But I'd already paid 3 months' rent in advance, and I couldn't afford to lose that money. Besides, there was a stubborn part of me that refused to be driven out of my own home by something I couldn't even identify or understand. I decided instead to try to establish some kind of routine, some way of living with whatever was happening. I'd keep my bedroom door closed at night. I'd try to ignore strange sounds. I'd accept that sometimes things would be moved or changed, and I wouldn't get an explanation. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. That approach lasted about 3 days. On Sunday afternoon, I was in the living room reading a book, a crime novel I'd been trying to finish for weeks. The room was bright with spring sunshine, and I'd opened the window a crack to let in some fresh air. I was comfortable, relaxed, absorbed in the story. Then very slowly, very deliberately, the book was pulled out of my hands. I wasn't holding it loosely. My fingers were around the spine, my thumb marking my place. But it was tugged away with steady force, pulled upward and out of my grasp, then dropped on the floor at my feet. I sat there staring at it, my hands still raised in the position they'd been in when I was holding the book, and I felt something shift inside me. Not quite fear, not quite anger, but something that contained elements of both. I picked up the book and stood up, my legs unsteady, and looked around the room. The furniture, the television, the shelves with their ornaments and photographs. Everything was still and ordinary and completely wrong. I said something out loud then, the first time I'd spoken to the empty air, though I won't repeat what I said because it sounds foolish now. I demanded to know what was happening, who or what was doing this, what it wanted from me. The room remained silent. The sunshine continued to pour through the window. A car drove past outside. Normal life carrying on all around me while I stood in my living room shouting at nothing. I sat back down, picked up the book, and continued reading. My hands were shaking, and I had to read each sentence twice to understand it, but I finished the chapter. Nobody pulled the book away again. Nothing else happened. I was making a point, I suppose, though I'm not sure who to. That evening, I made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and went to bed early with a glass of wine and my laptop. I watched a comedy series I'd seen before, something light and familiar, and finished the wine. I was just drifting off to sleep when I felt something sit down on the end of the bed. The mattress compressed, springs creaking softly, exactly as they would if someone had perched on the edge. I felt the shift in weight, the slight movement of the duvet. I lay completely still, my eyes wide open, staring at the darkened corner of the room. The weight remained steady and undeniable. After perhaps a minute, it lifted, the mattress rising back into place, and I heard soft footsteps cross the room to the door. The door was closed. I'd shut it firmly before getting into bed, but now I heard the handle turn, heard the hinges creak as the door swung open. The footsteps continued out onto the landing, fading away toward the stairs. Then silence. I got up, my whole body trembling, and looked out onto the landing. Nothing. I checked the spare bedroom, the bathroom, went downstairs, and checked the living room and kitchen. Everything was empty and still. I went back to bed and didn't sleep at all that night, lying there with the lamp on and my phone in my hand, ready to call for help, though I had no idea who I would call or what I would tell them. Monday morning, I went to work in a daze. Jennifer took one look at me and insisted I go home, said I looked dreadful and was clearly unwell. I didn't argue. I drove back to the house, let myself in, and stood in the hallway trying to decide what to do. The photographs were upside down again, all 5 of them inverted on the wall. I walked past them up to my bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, and closed my eyes. I was so tired. Tired of being frightened, tired of second-guessing everything, tired of living in a state of constant vigilance. I just wanted to sleep. I woke several hours later, the room dim with late afternoon light. For a moment I felt peaceful, that pleasant disorientation of waking from deep sleep. Then I remembered where I was and what had been happening, and the peace evaporated. I got up and went downstairs to make tea. The kitchen was cold despite the heating being on, and I noticed frost patterns on the inside of the window above the sink. Actual frost, delicate crystalline formations spreading across the glass. It was April. The heating was on. Frost on the inside of windows doesn't happen under those conditions. I touched the glass and it was freezing, painful against my fingertips. My breath misted in the air. The temperature in the kitchen was dropping rapidly, and I stepped back toward the door, suddenly frightened in a visceral way I hadn't been before. This felt actively hostile, threatening. Then I heard it, a child's voice, thin and distant, coming from somewhere in the house, singing. A nursery rhyme, one I recognized but couldn't quite place. The melody was slow and slightly wrong, the notes not quite where they should be. It was coming from upstairs. I left the kitchen and climbed the stairs, following the sound. It was coming from the study. The door was ajar and I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room was empty, but the singing continued, seeming to come from all around me, from the walls themselves. I stood in the doorway listening to it, and I realized I was crying, tears running down my face, though I hadn't noticed them starting. The singing stopped abruptly, cut off mid-verse. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like pressure in my ears. I backed out of the room, went downstairs, grabbed my coat and bag, and left the house. I got in my car and drove to a cafe in town, ordered tea and a scone I didn't eat, and sat there until closing time. When I finally went back, it was dark. I let myself in cautiously, half expecting to find something terrible waiting for me. But the house felt normal. The temperature was fine. The frost was gone from the kitchen window. Everything was quiet and still. I went to bed early and slept surprisingly well, exhausted enough that nothing could have kept me awake. I woke Tuesday morning feeling better than I had in days, almost optimistic. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps whatever had been happening had run its course and I could go back to normal life. That optimism lasted until I went into the bathroom and saw what was written on the mirror. Not words, numbers. A date, written in what looked like condensation but didn't fade or drip. The glass around the numbers was fogged and wet, but the numbers themselves were clear. A date from nearly 80 years ago, sometime in the 1940s. Below it were initials, 3 letters I didn't recognize. I reached out to wipe it away and jerked my hand back. The mirror was ice cold, far colder than any surface in a heated house should be. I grabbed a towel and rubbed the glass clean, the condensation coming away easily, but my hands were numb by the time I finished. I got ready for work in a mechanical way, brushing my teeth and washing my face and getting dressed without really thinking about what I was doing. My mind was trying to process the date, to understand what it might mean. I'd never been good at history, had no idea what might have happened in the 40s that could be relevant. The war, obviously, but beyond that, I was blank. At work, I spent my lunch break researching the house. I found records online showing it had been built in 1892, that it had been occupied by various families over the decades. During the war, it had been home to a family with 3 children, and one of the children, a girl aged 7, had died there in 1944. The date on the mirror, her name matched the initials. I sat at my desk staring at this information on my screen, and I felt something slot into place. Not relief exactly, but understanding. The house wasn't haunted by some malevolent presence. It was haunted by a child, a little girl who died there decades ago and apparently hadn't left. That should have made me feel better, should have made the haunting seem less threatening, but it didn't. If anything, it made everything worse because now I couldn't pretend this was just strange occurrences that might have natural explanations. This was a ghost, a real ghost, the spirit of a dead child, sharing my home and trying to communicate with me in the only ways it knew how. I left work early, claiming a headache that was rapidly becoming real. I drove home through rain that had started sometime during the afternoon. Heavy drops that streamed down the windscreen faster than the wipers could clear them. The house looked grey and unwelcoming as I pulled up outside, the windows dark, the lime trees along the street dripping and skeletal. I let myself in and stood in the hallway, dripping water onto the mat. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could feel it now, that presence I'd been trying to deny. Not hostile, not threatening, just there, watching, waiting. I hung up my coat and went through to the kitchen. The The chairs were arranged in a circle again. I left them that way. In the living room, the photographs had been taken down from the walls and laid out on the sofa in a neat row. I looked at them for a moment, then left them where they were. Upstairs, I found the study had been rearranged. The books on the shelves had been organized by color, creating a rainbow effect that would have been pretty if it wasn't so unsettling. My desk had been cleared completely, everything removed and placed on the floor in tidy piles. In the center of the desk was a single object I didn't recognize. A small wooden horse, carved by hand, the paint faded and chipped. It was old, decades old at least, and I picked it up carefully. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt something. A rush of emotion that wasn't mine. Sadness and loneliness, and a desperate need to be seen, to be acknowledged. I stood there holding this child's toy, tears streaming down my face again, and I finally understood what was happening. She wasn't trying to frighten me. She was trying to play, trying to get my attention the only way she knew how. All the moved objects, the rearranged furniture, the sounds and apparitions, they were the actions of a lonely child trying to make contact with someone, anyone, who could perceive her. I don't know how long I stood there holding that toy horse. Long enough that the light outside faded and the room grew dark around me. Eventually, I set it down gently on the desk and went downstairs. I made dinner, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, and tried to think about what to do next. The rational part of my brain insisted I should leave, pack a bag, call the landlord, break the lease, and accept the financial loss. Living with a ghost, even a non-malevolent one, wasn't sustainable. It wasn't healthy. I'd barely slept in weeks. I was struggling at work, and the constant fear and uncertainty were taking a real toll. But another part of me, perhaps a less rational part, felt something close to pity. This child had been alone for 80 years, trapped in this house, unacknowledged and unseen, trying desperately to connect with the living people who came and went without ever recognizing her presence. And now someone could perceive her, could see the evidence of her existence, and that someone was planning to abandon her again. I went to bed that night without reaching a decision. I lay in the dark thinking about that little girl, trying to imagine what her life had been like, how she died, whether she knew she was dead, whether she was conscious in any way we'd understand, or just an echo, a recording playing out the same patterns endlessly. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke suddenly around 2 a.m. to find my room bathed in cold blue light. I sat up, my heart racing, and saw her standing at the foot of the bed. She was small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with dark hair cut short and a simple dress that might have been blue or grey. It was hard to tell in that strange light. Her face was pale and indistinct, features blurred as if I was seeing her through frosted glass. She stood perfectly still, watching me, and I found I wasn't frightened. Not anymore. We looked at each other for what might have been seconds or minutes, and then she held out her hand, just extended it toward me, palm up, in a gesture that was unmistakably an invitation, an offer to connect, to bridge whatever gap existed between her world and mine. I reached out slowly, my own hand trembling, and tried to take hers. My fingers passed through hers without any sensation of touch, just a coldness that made my bones ache. But for a moment, just a brief moment, I felt her. Not physically, but emotionally. Her loneliness, her confusion, her desperate need for companionship. And underneath all that, a strange kind of hope. Then she was gone. The blue light faded, and I was alone in the dark, my hand still extended toward empty air. I lowered it slowly and lay back down, pulling the covers up to my chin. I didn't sleep again that night, but I wasn't frightened. I was thinking. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to leave. I was going to stay, and I was going to find a way to help her if I could. I had no idea how to help a ghost, whether that was even possible, but I had to try. Over the following weeks, I researched everything I could find about the girl who died in my house. Her name was Catherine, and she died of scarlet fever in 1944, during the last year of the war. Her parents had continued living in the house for several years after her death, before eventually moving away. I found a photograph of her in a local archive, a school picture showing a serious-looking child with dark hair and a solemn expression. The activity in the house continued, but it felt different now that I understood the source. When I found objects moved or rearranged, I tried to appreciate the effort involved rather than feeling disturbed by it. When I heard her singing or moving through the rooms, I acknowledged her presence out loud, speaking to the empty air, telling her I knew she was there and that it was all right. I bought a few old-fashioned toys from antique shops and left them in the study. A rag doll, some wooden blocks, a small teddy bear with worn fur. They were moved around regularly, rearranged into scenes or patterns that suggested someone was playing with them. I found it comforting rather than unsettling. Work improved once I started sleeping better. Jennifer stopped asking if I was all right, and the senior partner stopped giving me concerned looks during meetings. I caught up on the work I'd been neglecting, and even took on some additional projects. My life began to normalize, or at least to find a new kind of normal that included cohabiting with a ghost. But it wasn't sustainable, not really. There were still nights when I'd wake to find her standing in my room. Still times when the temperature would drop so suddenly my breath would mist. There were moments of genuine fear, when I'd forget for a second what was happening and react with instinctive terror to some sound or movement. And there was the isolation. I couldn't tell anyone what was happening. My few friends assumed I was going through something difficult and gave me space. My family, who I'd never been particularly close to, sent occasional texts that I responded to with bland reassurances. I was living a double life, presenting normalcy to the outside world, while sharing my home with something impossible. About 3 months after I'd first seen Catherine clearly, I came home from work to find the house in chaos. Every drawer and cupboard was open, contents pulled out and scattered. Furniture had been pushed away from the walls. Books were pulled from shelves and left in heaps on the floor. The photographs in the hallway had been torn down, glass smashed, frames broken. I stood in the hallway, taking it all in, and I felt a wave of exhaustion so profound I had to lean against the wall for support. This wasn't playful anymore. This wasn't a lonely child seeking attention. This was something else. Frustration maybe, or anger, or desperation taken to an extreme. I climbed over the debris on the stairs and went to my bedroom. It was the only room that hadn't been touched. Everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. I sat on the bed and tried to think clearly, to understand what had changed, what had prompted this escalation. Then I realized it was the anniversary of her death. The date on the mirror, the date I'd found in the records. Today was the day Catherine had died 81 years ago. I went back downstairs and started cleaning up. I swept the broken glass, put books back on shelves, closed drawers and cupboards. It took hours, well into the evening, and by the time I finished I was exhausted and filthy. But the house looked normal again, or as normal as it ever did. That night, Catherine appeared in my room again, but she looked different, more solid somehow, more present. She stood at the foot of the bed, and I sat up to face her. And this time, when she extended her hand, I understood what she was asking. She wanted to leave. She wanted to move on, to stop being trapped in this endless loop of loneliness and confusion. And somehow she thought I could help her do that. I wish I could tell you I knew what to do, that I performed some ritual or said some words that released her from whatever was binding her to this house. But I didn't. I just sat there looking at her, at this echo of a child who'd been dead for 8 decades, and I told her I didn't know how to help. She faded slowly, her form becoming translucent, and then transparent, and then gone. The room returned to normal darkness, and I was alone again. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling, feeling like I'd failed some crucial test. The activity diminished after that night, but it didn't stop. Catherine was still here, still making her presence known, still trying to connect or communicate or simply exist in some way that mattered. I continued living in the house, continued acknowledging her presence, continued leaving toys for her to play with. But something had changed. The haunting felt sadder now, more melancholy. The sounds I heard at night seemed more plaintive. The objects that were moved seemed arranged with less enthusiasm, less creativity. It was as if Catherine had realized I couldn't help her and was slowly giving up hope. I'm still in the house now, nearly 18 months after I first moved in. The lease has been renewed, and I've settled into this strange existence. I've learned to sleep through most of the noises, to barely react when objects move or temperature drops suddenly. I've adapted, the way humans adapt to almost anything given enough time. But I think about her constantly, about Catherine, trapped here, unable to move on, unable to find peace. I think about what it means that she's real, that ghosts exist, that death isn't the end but might be the beginning of something far worse than we imagine. An existence of pure loneliness, unable to interact meaningfully with the world, invisible to almost everyone, conscious but powerless. Sometimes I wonder if I should try harder to help her. Research mediums or priests or paranormal investigators, people who claim to understand these things. But I'm afraid of making things worse, of bringing in strangers who might disturb whatever delicate balance we've established. Last week, I came home to find a message written in condensation on the bathroom mirror again. Not a date this time, just 2 words. Thank you. I stood there staring at those words until they faded, and I felt something in my chest crack open. Gratitude from a ghost. Appreciation for being seen, for being acknowledged, even if I couldn't provide the help she really needed. The photographs are upside down again today. I noticed them when I came in from work, but I haven't turned them right way up yet. I'm sitting in the kitchen writing this, and I can hear her moving around upstairs, that soft tread of small feet on old floorboards. The light is fading outside and soon it will be dark. I should make dinner. I should turn the photographs the right way up. I should do 100 ordinary things that make up an ordinary evening. But instead, I'm sitting here thinking about the little girl who died before my parents were born, who's been alone in this house for longer than I've been alive, who will probably still be here long after I'm gone. The footsteps have stopped. The house has gone quiet. In a moment, I'll get up and go about my evening, and everything will seem normal. But I'll know she's here, watching from somewhere I can't see, still hoping for something I don't know how to give. That's the worst part, I think. Not the fear or the strange occurrences or the disruption to my life. It's knowing that someone needs help and being completely powerless to provide it. It's living with the constant awareness that you're failing someone who has already lost everything. The kitchen is getting cold. For a long time, myself it wasn't worth mentioning. It wasn't dangerous, just persistent. Like a bad thought that wouldn't fade, waiting for the smallest sound to bring it back. 8 months of silence have done nothing to soften it. A door that won't stay closed. A light that flickers too long. The faint sense that someone's standing just out of sight. Close enough to notice, never close enough to prove. It began last March, when I moved into a terraced house in Exeter that had been divided into flats sometime in the 70s. Mine was the ground floor, compact, quiet, self-contained. After 6 months sleeping in my sister's spare room in Plymouth, it felt like I'd finally earned back a bit of normality. I'm a copy editor, so I spend most of my time at home. All I wanted was somewhere small and steady. A living room with decent light for work, a bedroom that fit the essentials, a kitchen that was tired but honest, and a bathroom painted in that old avocado green you only ever see in houses that have forgotten to change. The landlord, Graham, was an older bloke who owned a handful of places around the city. He didn't pry. He wanted to know I had work and a deposit. He mentioned the last tenant had left suddenly for a job up north. I nodded and didn't ask. People move. The rent wasn't ridiculous. The high street was a short walk, and I signed that afternoon. The first stretch was plain and clean. Falls calm. I unpacked, set my desk where the light fell best, got the Wi-Fi sorted, aired the place out. Empty flats have a particular smell. Paper, dust, something stale sunk into carpets. And I scrubbed until it faded. By the end of the week, it felt like mine. I don't need much. A second-hand sofa from a charity shop that turned out to be surprisingly forgiving. My books, a lamp with a warm shade, a kettle that boils quickly. The living room wallpaper had that raised texture that was probably trendy for 5 minutes 40 years ago. I didn't love it, but I didn't need to. The gas fire worked. Evenings were still cold. 3 weeks in, while finishing a manuscript close to 11, I heard a sound from the kitchen, a short scrape, like china shifting across a counter. I assumed I'd left the window on the latch and the breeze had nudged something. I stood, walked through, and found the window shut, the counter clear. The sink smelled faintly of bleach from the morning's clean. My mug was there, but on the other side of the draining board from where I remembered it. A tiny, nagging misalignment. I went back to my desk, told myself I was tired, and tried to forget it. Over the next few days, the flat developed a personality. Mild, forgetful, slightly contrary. A desk chair turned a few degrees left. A book returned to the wrong shelf. The tap stuttering to a drip that I could have sworn I'd tightened. Each thing had a fix and a reason. I gave the tap a new washer, lined the chair legs with felt pads, promised myself I'd pay more attention when shelving. Then I came in from the bathroom and found every single book turned around on the shelves. Not shifted, not pulled out, just rotated so the spines faced the back, and the shelves presented only pale paper edges to the room. The arrangement was flawless, fastidious. It looked like a deliberate insult to sense. I stood in the doorway and listened to the quiet of the flat. Radiator ticking down, the faint outside murmur through old windows, and waited for an explanation to arrive. It didn't. I turned each book back one by one, hands careful, heartbeat quick. I checked the windows and doors, all locked. No one else had a key. When I cooked later, I kept glancing at the shelves, as if the paper edges might swivel back when my head turned away. They didn't. I tried to file it with the mug and the tap and the chair, but it wouldn't sit neatly with them. It lodged. The weekend behaved. Saturday, I met a friend in town. Came back to attack a pile of admin I'd been avoiding. Sunday was rain and roast chicken, and a tidy satisfaction that carries you into bed earlier than usual. Calm returned. I slept easily. On Monday, I woke up to breath blooming in the air like white ink in water. Proper cold, the sort that slides into joints and settles. The thermostat read 8 degrees. I walked the flat in socks, breath trailing me, and touched a radiator that was hot enough to sting. The boiler hummed in the cupboard, steady and correct. The readings made no sense with the cold in my skin. I brewed coffee with my hands around the mug like a heat source, and the temperature climbed on its own towards 9 o'clock. By midday, the chill had burned off. When I rang Graham, he sounded relaxed and promised to send a bloke to take a look. The engineer came 2 days later. 20 minutes of neat movements and a polite shrug. Nothing wrong with the boiler. Nothing wrong with the rads. Old buildings, drafts, uneven heat. He wasn't unkind, just firm in his assessment. After he left, the flat felt bigger and slightly foolish, like I'd gone to A&E with a headache and been told to drink water. But the cold had been real. Tension began to stick. I started noticing the upstairs footsteps at the wrong times. The nurse above me worked long shifts, and the routine of her life was a soft soundtrack I'd learned without meaning to. Early alarm on some mornings, television murmuring on others, Hoover across the floor every so often. I knew the sound of her car on the street, but sometimes the ceiling carried heavy, steady footfalls in the small hours, crossing the flat from front to back and back again with a metronome's patience. At times, when her parking space was empty and the street outside sat damp and quiet. Pipes don't pace. Buildings don't practice walking. I almost asked her about it once when we passed at the front door, with my hand halfway up in a half wave and a question forming. But I heard myself in my head and let it go. I said good morning instead. The kitchen developed a habit that felt like theatre. I woke to find every cupboard hanging open, top and bottom the lot, as if someone had moved through systematically and left each door in the same impossible position. The back door was locked, the window latched, nothing missing, nothing rummaged. I took to closing each cupboard at night with a calm, deliberate press and a childish extra push, like tucking in a child. It made no difference. After a week, I left them as they wanted to be. I had the sense of playing a game I didn't agree to play. Work slipped. I'd open a manuscript and find the meaning of sentences dissolving mid-paragraph while I listened for something that might happen. My concentration frayed into listening. My sister rang one evening in early May. I must have sounded oddly hollow because she asked, more than once, whether I was sleeping, whether I needed to come down for a few days. I thought about the cupboards and the cold and the books and said I was fine, overworked, and promised to visit soon. The moment to tell her came and went, and I let it pass because pinning the events to words felt like giving them permission to stand up. That weekend, a boundary shifted. I woke on Saturday to find my bedroom door wide open. I always slept with it closed. I like contained rooms, predictable shapes in the dark. The open doorway showed a slice of hall and a sliver of living room wall, and something inside me tightened. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the clean, unmistakable sense that a rule had been broken. I shut the door, felt the latch catch, and spent the day pretending the rule still held. That night, I wedged a trainer against the bottom edge before getting into bed. Not because I believed it would stop anything, because I needed the theatre of doing something. I stared at the door until my eyes hurt. I fell asleep near 3. The door was still closed in the morning. The trainer was still in place. Relief and foolishness arrived together. On Sunday, the door was open again when I woke up. The trainer lay in the hall a meter away, not kicked, not shuffled, but tossed, as if picked up between finger and thumb and flicked. The hall was dark, a soft dark, and I couldn't see into the living room from the bed. My mouth went dry. I stood, switched on every light in sequence, and searched the flat, cupboards, under the bed, behind the sofa, knowing it was useless and doing it anyway. Nothing. Emptiness presented itself like evidence. I didn't sleep that night. The flat's noises, pipes clicking as they cooled, the fridge's soft motor, a gentle joint in the floorboards above, became sharp and itemized. Each sound felt like a presence testing the shape of the room. On Monday, I was grey with exhaustion and called off a Zoom with a publisher. I said I was unwell. I made strong coffee that did nothing and sat at my desk, cursor blinking on paragraphs I didn't recognize. I thought about packing. The sensible part of me proposed it clearly. Pack, ring Graham, say you need to break the lease, go back to your sisters for a bit. The other part of me, persistent now, said I'd been chosen for a game and running wouldn't end it. It sounded like fear pretending to be logic, but it was convincing. The bathroom incident fixed my thinking. Thursday at 7, routine in place, shower, teeth, the rhythm of a regular morning. While brushing, I caught motion in the mirror. A shadow crossed behind me from left to right in a smooth, unhurried pass. I turned so fast the toothbrush clicked against my teeth. The doorway was empty. I looked back at the mirror. My own face looked off, too pale, eyes edged red from poor sleep. As I watched, the center of the glass began to fog, not slowly from the edges, the way steam creeps up after a hot shower. From the center outward, as if an invisible mouth were pressed flat against the other side of the glass and exhaling. The fog spread in a clean halo, reaching the edges like frost patterns growing at speed. 4 marks appeared in the moisture, long, even fingers pressed from the wrong side, then dragged down with a visible, patient pressure, leaving clear lines in their wake. I stepped back until my spine touched the bath. The cold enamel came through my t-shirt. I left the bathroom, left the flat, put my coat over pajamas, and walked into the street without looking back. I sat in a cafe with the tea I didn't drink and watched strangers do normal, solvent things. One man read the paper with his glasses low on his nose and clicked his tongue at the football results. A woman spread out revision notes and drew fluorescent lines. I wanted to sit in their lives for a while, like a visitor, and then return to mine, repaired. When I went back at noon, the bathroom mirror was clean and dry. The window was closed. The air was ordinary. There was no sign of breath or touch. If I'd invented it, I had done so with impressive clarity. I spent the evening reading about the house out of a mechanical need to find a suitable story to attach to it, a death or a fire or the neat explanation of a tragedy. There wasn't one. Built early last century, subdivided in the 70s, ordinary lives moving through it and out again. No headlines, no neat story to insert as an answer. Sleep became negotiation rather than rest. Any time I began to fall, something jerked me back. At 4, I gave up and sat under a blanket in the living room with the light on, listening to the building breathe and settle. I started to recognize that my fear was a separate presence in the room. It also had weight, and it also moved between chairs. After that night, the activities moved from occasional to daily, and from coy to intimate. Escalation. I found my hairbrush balanced on the top shelf of the fridge next to the milk, the bristles cold. I found my laptop mouse in the bathroom cabinet, centered neatly between paracetamol and plasters. Books stacked in deliberate towers that were steady enough to knock into with a knee and not fall. Each new discovery was small and carefully wrong. The wrongness was the point. The noises changed tone, not louder, but tuned to my name. A voice, like a breath, said it from the other room and stopped when I stood. Scratching started inside a wall and went silent when I touched the paint, as if a hand laid itself flat on the other side. Once I heard glass shatter crisply in the kitchen, that lovely high tinkle of a proper smash, and found nothing disturbed when I walked in. The air still held the echo without the evidence. I moved onto the sofa because the bedroom felt occupied, even when it was empty. The foot of the bed had a cold patch the size of a person's chest that didn't obey the heating. You could place your hand into it like you were testing water. The cold would climb your skin and hang there even after you moved away. I stopped stepping into it. Work slid further towards apology. A publisher, who's always patient, sent a gentle message asking whether everything was all right. I typed and retyped answers that trod near the truth and deleted them, and sent something brief about personal circumstances. I started to refuse invitations and stopped extending any. On a Sunday in late June, the escalation found skin. I was half asleep on the sofa with the telly murmur low just for company, when something gripped my hair at the scalp and pulled. Not a brush catching, not a static drag. Fingers, thumb and forefingers closing, pressing and yanking. My head snapped back. I sat up with a sound that surprised me and felt the sting in the roots like heat. Several hairs wrapped around my fingers when I touched there, and the tiny ache they left behind stayed hot and honest. The room held its shape, air unmoved, the lamp making the same pool on the textured wallpaper. But I could feel the place where a hand had been, as clearly as if someone stood in front of me. Fear changed temperature. For the first time it became anger. It felt like being shoved on the pavement by someone who doesn't even make eye contact. I said something into the room. I won't repeat it. It sounded thin leaving my mouth. I said go. I said enough. I said stop touching me. Silence fell in a way I've never heard at home. The street withdrew. The building closed its throat. No water in any pipe. No electronic hums. It was like being inside a recording booth. The flat held its breath. Then every door in the place slammed at once. Not just the interior doors, cupboards, the bathroom cabinet, the wardrobe. The sound had the clean, wooden crack of proper force and arrived in a single, synchronized clap that went through my chest and left a hollow behind it. The living room door hit so hard the frame shuddered. Dust lifted from the top of the skirting and hung briefly in the lamplight like a glitter that didn't belong there. I ran, keys, phone, out. I didn't lock the door behind me. I ran until my lungs burned in the mild evening and sat on a bench near the park thinking about how the body can shake in places you didn't know it had space to shake in. I didn't go back that night. I rang my sister, and the first word out of my mouth must have been enough, because she told me to come and didn't ask for detail. The next morning, we went together, and I packed clothes and a few essentials with my eyes on the corners of rooms. We left. Plymouth let me sleep the first night, like I'd been benched at last and allowed to rest. My sister asked kind questions in ordinary tones for 3 weeks, and I failed to assemble answers that didn't sound like excuses for losing my grip. The spare room had its own cold spot under the window that we both chalked up to old frames and wind that day, and didn't discuss again. I told myself I was still carrying the fear, heavy and useless, and laying it over every shape like tracing paper. Eventually, the practicalities tapped. I couldn't keep paying rent on a place I wasn't in. I couldn't live indefinitely in the spare room like an open suitcase. I drove back to Exeter on a warm July afternoon that made the city look almost forgiving. I unlocked the flat and paused on the threshold, listening for the weight of a room that's been waiting. It felt neutral, not friendly, not charged, as if something had stepped to the side. I walked through slowly, and the rooms held. The cupboards were shut. No stacks, no condensation, no strange placement of everyday things. I put a bag down and made dinner with quiet hands and ate it at the small table, and every bite tasted like food rather than nerves. That night, I dozed on the sofa under lamplight, sleeping in small climbs and slides. Nothing happened. The silence had an ordinary texture again. False calm, I see that now, but it was a relief that moved like water. Across the next few weeks, the flat behaved like a place learning its manners. A door left ajar here, the heating thumping into life at a time it wasn't set for. Little reminders, nothing aggressive. I began to pretend that the slam had ended something. I even worked with something like my old focus. I started to think about inviting someone over. In August, it returned, altered, less violent, more meticulous, persistent. I woke to find every photograph turned face down. I opened drawers to find my clothes removed, folded neatly on the bed in stacks that remembered color and weight. The books were reorganized by color into a gradient, red through to blue, spines crisp, the effort invisible. It had the neatness of a caretaker who disapproved of how I stored things. Then one morning, the bathroom mirror wore a clear message in fresh condensation. Not handprints, letters. Get out. Plain, clean lines, centered. I stood with a toothbrush in my hand and looked at the instruction like it had come through the post. I wiped it away with the edge of a towel that left a clean arc in the moisture and carried on. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired of being spoken to from the wrong side of things. The messages continued. Not always words. Sometimes a single arrow traced in dust on a bookshelf pointing at nothing. Sometimes objects arranged into shapes on the table that left the meaning just out of reach. Once the cutlery drawer held only knives laid out like instruments, the forks and spoons in a neat pile on the counter, as if someone had given me a choice. The footsteps grew louder, and the cold patches colder, and the sense of being watched moved from moments to a constant presence that sat behind me at the desk like a second chair. I stayed. Every day I didn't leave felt like not giving it the answer it wanted. That might have been bravado or stubbornness, or just a tired mind choosing the simple rule: keep going. I started to think about attachment differently. The flat felt like a stage some days, but other days the sense of it lived nearer my skin. I caught myself pausing on certain floorboards as if I expected another foot to step beside mine. I remembered the 3 weeks in Plymouth, and the spare room's deep chill under the window at 2 a.m, and the faint steps in the corridor I told myself belonged to the house settling. Trailing me wasn't grand. It was just a quiet, constant option available to whatever this was. The thought made ordinary spaces feel like contact points rather than shelters. Last week, looking for a book I'd been meaning to reread for years, I opened a box I'd taped shut before moving in with my sister. On top was a photograph from my previous flat. One of those late evening people glow shots from a dinner I'd hosted. Half a dozen of us in casual clothes, elbow to elbow, laughing at something I can't hear anymore. The kitchen light had thrown a warm band across our faces. Behind us, in the doorway to the hall, the darkness was deeper than it should have been, and inside that dark stood a person-shaped absence, tall, thin, not a smudge of motion, not flash burn, a presence like negative space. I stared at it until my eyes adjusted and the shape remained instead of correcting itself into wallpaper. I went through other photographs from that time, drawn by a need to test whether I was teaching myself to see things that weren't there. It appears again and again, at the edge of frames, half in a reflection, just inside a doorway, as if the camera pulled it slightly closer each time. No face, no features, a silhouette with the scale and alignment of a person. Watching, patient, close enough that I should have felt breath if breath existed for it. I don't know how long it's been with me. Years is a reasonable guess. I don't have a story that pins it neatly to a single door opened or an object bought at a market that used to belong to the wrong person. I've been resisting a story because stories make it sound finished, and this isn't finished. It's a habit. It's a daily practice performed by something I didn't ask for. Right now, as I sit at my desk, the cupboards in the kitchen are opening one by one. The hinges make a specific sound. Soft click up, then the faint sigh as the door moves past equilibrium and swings to its full extent. The sound is clean, repetitive, measured out with a few seconds between each door, as if someone is taking care not to rush. I haven't turned around yet. When I do, they'll be wide like always, and I'll close them like always, because I'm still living here, and that means doing the small chores that come with it. Tomorrow morning, they'll be open again, and I'll go through the same predictable motions. The flat is cold today, the kind of cold that lays a film over the skin and stays put. I can see my breath. It moves in front of my face and then disappears, and in the moment before it fades, I have the precise sensation that something is standing very near, testing the air as I do, inhaling when I exhale, exhaling when I inhale, patient and exact, sharing the room as if it also pays rent. I tell myself, again, that leaving might not help. The photograph insists on that. The spare room in Plymouth insists. I could pack a bag tonight and wake up to the same gentle click of unfamiliar hinges in a different kitchen, the same soft swing of cupboard doors in a new geometry. I could tell myself I've beaten it by refusing to admit it and find the word written on whatever mirror I face in the morning steam, the word we both know. For now, I'm typing, and the keys feel cold, and the flat is listening. False calm, tension, a reveal I keep trying not to name, escalation measured in the ordinary, the drop always the same, a quiet that isn't empty, a breath I can see, and the slow swing of a door I didn't touch.